Ever wonder about, that phrase where the rubber meets the road? Well, today we're diving deep into a story that starts with something we all know. Car tires. And it takes us all the way to Liberia, to Firestone, Liberia,
Yeah,
one of the world's largest rubber plantations.
it is. It's in Liberia, tucked away there. And it's more than just a plantation. It's a century-long partnership that has a really complex history, and a footprint that stretches across the globe.
It's massive. We're talking 118,000 acres. That's the largest single rubber plantation anywhere in the world.
It's enormous.
It's a major source of natural rubber for Bridgestone Americas.
Yeah.
The company behind Firestone Tires.
Right.
But is this partnership just about, rubber and tires?
Yeah.
Or is there something more to uncover here?
Well, the sheer scale of Firestone Liberia is kind of mind-boggling. It's a major force in Liberia's economy, over $100 million that they contribute every year, and they employ thousands of people. To understand the impact, though, we need to rewind the clock. We need to go back to the very beginnings of this partnership.
Okay, so let's unpack that history. The story begins in the 1920s with what some people have called a sweetheart deal. Firestone secured a 99-year lease on 1 million acres. That's 110th of Liberia's arable land. And they got it all for just 6 cents an acre.
Yeah, and that initial agreement back in the 1920s really sets the stage for all the complexities that we see today. It speaks to the power dynamics of the time when you had multinational corporations holding a lot of power in developing countries. And this deal basically granted Firestone huge control over a really crucial resource in Liberia.
And that must have had a significant impact on Liberia's development, right? I mean, was this a corporation sort of helping a nation to prosper, or was it more about Firestone just securing their own interests?
Well, and that's the core question we're exploring here. In the 1950s, there was a period that some have called Firestone's golden era. Profits were booming, Firestone employed a large workforce, and certainly the Liberian ruling class benefited. However, that cozy relationship, it began to shift in the 1970s under President Tolbert. And Tolbert, he pushed for higher taxes from Firestone, more Liberians in management positions, basically, a greater share of the pie for Liberia.
Sounds like things were getting a little tense there.
Right.
Did Firestone push back on those demands?
They absolutely did. They argued that it was going to hurt their profitability.
Right.
And this is where the idea of economic sovereignty comes into play. President Tolbert was essentially asserting Liberia's right to control their own resources and their economic destiny, even if it meant clashing with the interests of a powerful corporation.
Yeah. It's fascinating how this one company, became so deeply intertwined with an entire nation's history and development.
Yeah.
But if we fast forward to today, the lease agreement got extended in 2005 to 2041.
Right.
That's a total of 115 years.
Wow.
So clearly the relationship continues on.
It does. The current agreement encompasses almost 120,000 acres. Firestone's still exporting over 100 million pounds of rubber every year, employs thousands, makes a substantial contribution to Liberia's economy.
But I'm sensing a but coming here.
Well, you're right. There's another layer to this story. While Firestone Liberia continues to be a major economic engine, there are significant controversies surrounding its operations. And these controversies are really at the heart of our deep dive today.
Okay, so let's dive into those controversies then. One of the most prominent concerns, at least from the material that you sent me, seems to be worker welfare. There are reports of low wages, inadequate housing, limited access to health care, even concerns about child labor, though Firestone has denied those particular allegations.
Yeah, and these concerns about worker welfare, they're absolutely critical. We're talking about the well-being of thousands of people and their families. And it leads us back to that fundamental question. Can a company be a major economic contributor while also being criticized for its labor practices?
Yeah, that's the crux of it, right?
Yeah.
How do you balance that need for jobs with the ethical imperative to ensure those jobs provide a living wage and, decent working conditions? It's easy to say, well, a company should just pay its workers more.
Right.
But what if that really reduces their profitability?
Exactly.
Potentially even leading to job cuts or pulling out of Liberia altogether.
It's a classic dilemma, and it's one that's not unique to Firestone Liberia. A lot of developing countries face these challenges, trying to attract foreign investment to create jobs, while also ensuring that those investments benefit their citizens in a meaningful way.
And it's not just about the wages themselves, is it? You mentioned other concerns about worker welfare.
Yeah.
The reports that I read also mentioned inadequate housing for workers and limited access to health care. These are fundamental needs
Absolutely.
that go beyond just earning a paycheck, right?
Right. You're absolutely right. Those factors contribute to the overall well-being of the workforce and their families. We have to look at the whole picture,
Yeah.
not just the numbers on a pay stub. When workers are struggling to meet their basic needs, it raises serious questions about the sustainability and the ethical implications of the entire operation.
It's a very complex situation,
Right.
and it just gets more complex when you consider that Firestone outsources a lot of its tapping operations to contractors.
Right.
One of the sources that you shared was a former Firestone employee who now is working as a contractor.
Okay.
And they explained that this shift has actually resulted in reduced job security and benefits.
Yeah, and that's a really crucial point to bring up. This shift towards contract labor is a trend that we see in so many industries, and it often leads to kind of a two-tiered system where contract workers lack the same protections and benefits as the full-time employees. And this obviously raises concerns about job stability. It can further exacerbate those existing inequalities.
So Firestone has taken some steps to address these criticisms, though, haven't they? You mentioned earlier that they invested in new wastewater treatment facilities.
Right.
They were the first natural rubber farm to actually earn the ISCC PLUS certification,
They were
which I think stands for International Sustainability and Carbon Certification.
correct.
Doesn't that demonstrate some level of commitment to responsible practices?
It's certainly a positive step. The ISCC PLUS certification, for example, it sets standards for environmental sustainability and social responsibility across the supply chain.
Right.
But it's crucial to look beyond certifications. You have to examine what the realities are on the ground. Are these initiatives truly improving worker well-being? Are they truly addressing the environmental concerns? Or are they primarily PR moves?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's about going beyond just those surface level changes and making sure that there are real lasting improvements.
Exactly. It's about accountability and transparency. It's about Firestone actually engaging in meaningful dialogue with their workforce, with the local communities, with independent observers to really address these concerns head on.
And what role does Liberia's government play in all this?
Mm.
From what I understand, the National Bureau of Concessions, they're responsible for monitoring Firestone's compliance with this lease agreement.
Uh-huh.
But is that enough to ensure a fair and balanced partnership?
And that's a crucial question. The Liberian government, they walk a tightrope here. On one hand, they want to attract foreign investment, they want to foster economic growth, but on the other hand, they have a responsibility to protect their citizens and protect their environment. The effectiveness of the National Bureau of Concessions, their ability to truly hold a powerful entity like Firestone accountable, that's a major factor in determining whether this partnership is truly beneficial for Liberia.
This brings us back to the issue of economic sovereignty
Yeah.
that we discussed earlier. How much leverage does Liberia truly have in negotiations with a multinational corporation like Firestone?
Right, and it's this constant balancing act. Liberia's government has to weigh those potential benefits of Firestone's presence against the potential costs. And they have to consider whether the current lease agreement, which still has years to run, truly serves the best interests of the Liberian people.
So we've talked about worker welfare concerns, and we've touched on those environmental aspects.
Right.
But there's another layer to this, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's the overall economic impact that Firestone has on Liberia.
Absolutely. There's this broader question here about whether Liberia is truly reaping the economic rewards that it should from this valuable resource. While Firestone contributes significantly to the economy, through taxes and employment, some critics argue that the government's tax revenue from Firestone is disproportionately low, considering the scale of their operations and the value of the rubber they're extracting.
It's almost like this paradox, isn't it? You have Firestone. It's this massive presence in Liberia, and they contribute to the economy. And yet, there are these questions about whether that contribution is equitable and whether it outweighs the potential social and environmental costs.
It's a complex equation with a lot of variables.
Yeah.
It's about finding that balance between short-term gains and long-term sustainability. And it's about making sure that Liberia's natural resources are being used in a way that benefits the entire nation, not just a select few.
Yeah, we've certainly covered a lot of ground here, from worker concerns to environmental impacts and the broader economic implications of Firestone's presence
We have.
in Liberia. It's clear that this partnership is far more complex than it might appear on the surface. So where do we go from here? What does the future hold for Firestone Liberia?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's one we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll delve into potential solutions. We'll examine what steps Firestone, the Liberian government, and even global consumers can take to ensure a more sustainable and equitable future for all involved.
We've talked about the controversies around Firestone, Liberia, but
Yeah.
let's get specific. You sent over some pretty compelling reports highlighting, worker concerns.
Right.
One that stood out to me, detailed allegations of wages being so low that they barely cover basic living expenses, even by, Liberian standards.
Yeah, that report, it aligns with a pattern of criticism that's been leveled at Firestone. The International Labor Organization, for instance, they've raised concerns about both wages and working conditions at Firestone, Liberia.
Right.
It is a complicated situation, though, isn't it?
Hmm.
Because while these concerns are very real, Firestone also employs thousands of people, providing jobs that might not otherwise exist.
That's the crux of it, isn't it? How do you balance the need for jobs with the ethical imperative to make sure those jobs provide a living wage and decent working conditions? It's easy to just say a company should pay its workers more.
Right.
But what if that drastically cuts into their profitability? Maybe even leads to job cuts
Right.
or pulling out of Liberia altogether.
It's a classic dilemma, and it's not unique to Firestone, Liberia. Many developing countries face similar challenges, trying to attract foreign investment, create jobs, while also ensuring that those investments benefit their citizens in a meaningful way.
And it's not just about the wages themselves, is it?
No.
You mentioned other worker concerns.
Yeah.
The reports I read also mentioned inadequate housing for workers and limited access to health care. These are fundamental needs.
Absolutely.
They go beyond just earning a paycheck.
Right. You're absolutely right. Those factors contribute to the overall well-being of the workforce and their families. We have to look at the whole picture, not just the numbers on a pay stub. When workers are struggling to meet their basic needs, it raises serious questions about the sustainability and ethical implications of the entire operation.
And to make things even more complicated, Firestone outsources a good portion of its tapping operations to contractors.
Right.
In one of the sources you shared, there was a former Firestone employee who now works as a contractor. And they explained that this shift has actually resulted in, reduced job security and benefits.
Yeah, and that's a crucial point. This shift towards contract labor, it's a trend we see in many industries. And it often leads to this two-tiered system where contract workers, they don't get the same protections and benefits as full-time employees. And this raises concerns about job stability, and it can exacerbate those existing inequalities even further.
Now, Firestone has taken some steps to try and address these criticisms, haven't they?
Yeah.
Like you mentioned earlier, they invested in new wastewater treatment facilities.
Right.
They were the first natural rubber farm to earn that ISCC PLUS certification,
Right.
the International Sustainability and Carbon Certification.
Right, exactly.
Doesn't that at least demonstrate some level of commitment to responsible practices?
It's certainly a positive step. The ISCC PLUS certification, for example, it sets standards for environmental sustainability and social responsibility across the supply chain. But it's crucial to look beyond these certifications and actually examine what's happening on the ground. Are these initiatives actually making a difference in worker well-being? Are they addressing environmental concerns, or are they just PR moves?
I see what you're saying. It's about going beyond those surface-level changes
Yeah.
and really ensuring that there are real lasting improvements.
Exactly. It's about accountability and transparency.
Right.
It's about Firestone engaging in meaningful dialogue with its workforce, with the local communities, with independent observers to address these concerns head on.
So what role does Liberia's government play in all this? From my understanding, the National Bureau of Concessions, they're the ones who are responsible for monitoring Firestone's compliance with this lease agreement. But is that enough?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Liberian government, they're walking this tightrope. On one hand, they want foreign investment. They want to encourage economic growth, but they're also responsible for protecting their people and protecting their environment. And the effectiveness of that National Bureau of Concessions, their ability to really hold a powerful entity like Firestone accountable,
Right.
that's a major factor in determining whether this partnership is really beneficial for Liberia.
This brings us back to that issue of economic sovereignty that we were talking about before. How much leverage does Liberia actually have in these negotiations with such a large multinational corporation like Firestone?
Right, and it's this constant balancing act. The Liberian government, they have to weigh the potential benefits of Firestone being there against the potential costs, and they have to consider whether the current lease agreement, which still has years to run, truly serves the best interests of the Liberian people.
We've talked about the worker welfare concerns. We've touched on those environmental aspects.
Right.
But there's another layer to this, isn't there? It's that overall economic impact of Firestone on Liberia.
Absolutely. There's a broader question here about whether Liberia is really benefiting the way it should from this valuable resource.
Hmm.
Firestone does contribute a lot to the economy through taxes and employment,
Right.
but some critics argue that the government's tax revenue from Firestone is actually really low considering how much rubber they're extracting and the scale of the operation.
It's almost like this paradox, isn't it? Firestone is this huge presence in Liberia. They contribute to the economy, but there are still these lingering questions about whether that contribution is equitable and whether it outweighs the potential downsides,
Right.
the social and environmental costs.
It's a complex equation with many variables. It's about finding that balance between those short-term gains and long-term sustainability. And it's about making sure that Liberia's natural resources are being used in a way that benefits the whole nation, not just a select few.
Yeah, we've covered a lot here, from worker concerns to environmental impacts and the broader economic implications of Firestone's presence in Liberia. It's clear that this partnership is a lot more complex than it might seem.
It really is.
So where do we go from here?
Right.
What does the future hold for Firestone Liberia?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's one we're going to explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll delve into potential solutions. We'll examine what steps Firestone, the Liberian government, and even global consumers can take to ensure a more sustainable and equitable future for everyone involved.
So we've dug deep into these complexities of Firestone Liberia, the history, the controversies, the challenges.
Yeah, we've seen a lot.
Now it's time to look ahead. What are some potential paths forward? What can be done to try to address these concerns, maybe even find a better balance?
Well, I think a really crucial first step is a real commitment to improving the lives of Firestone's workers.
Okay.
And that means making sure that they have fair wages, that they have safe working conditions, and access to essential services like healthcare and education. It's about moving beyond just complying with the law and truly investing in the well-being of their employees.
And from what I've gathered from the materials you shared, it can't just be about checking boxes.
Right,
It
exactly.
needs to be a real shift
Right.
in how Firestone approaches its relationship with its workers.
It has to be. It's about fostering a workplace culture where people feel valued, they feel respected, and they have a voice in the decisions that affect their lives. And this goes beyond just the individual workers, too. It also includes engaging with the surrounding communities.
Yeah.
Firestone needs to really address those concerns about their environmental impact and actually collaborate to find solutions that benefit everybody.
So more transparency, more open dialogue.
Absolutely. Transparency builds trust.
Right.
And open dialogue is essential for finding some common ground and working towards those shared goals. Imagine Firestone actively seeking input from its workers, from the communities, proactively addressing concerns, and really working together to create a more sustainable and equitable future.
It does sound like a win-win.
It does, doesn't it?
So let's talk about the economics for a second. Liberia deserves to reap fair benefits from its resources, right?
Yeah.
How can they ensure that that happens?
Well, that's where things get tricky. It's about finding that sweet spot where Firestone can operate profitably, but also contribute meaningfully to Liberia's economic development. Maybe that means renegotiating some aspects of the lease agreement
Right.
to ensure that there's a more equitable distribution of revenue. Or maybe it's about exploring new opportunities for local processing and manufacturing of rubber products, adding value within Liberia itself.
Right.
Investing in education and training programs to create a more skilled workforce would benefit everyone in the long run.
Yeah. Articles that you sent mentioned a really interesting idea. It was about establishing a sovereign wealth fund
Okay.
using some of the revenue that's generated from Firestone's operations. This fund could then be used to invest in, infrastructure, education, healthcare, things that benefit all Liberians.
Yeah.
It could be a way to create a lasting legacy, even beyond the lifespan of the plantation itself.
That's a great example of thinking long-term and strategically. It's recognizing that these resources are finite and making sure that their extraction benefits future generations.
Right. It sounds like achieving a truly sustainable and equitable future for Firestone Liberia is going to take a concerted effort
It will.
from everyone involved. Firestone itself,
Right.
the Liberian government, the local communities, even global consumers who are buying products made with Firestone rubber.
I think you summed it up perfectly. This is a shared responsibility. As consumers, we have a role to play too. By demanding transparency, demanding ethical sourcing practices, we can send a really powerful message to corporations like Firestone. Ultimately, change happens when all stakeholders are engaged and pushing in the same direction.
So to our listeners out there, the next time you see a Firestone tire, remember, it's not just a piece of rubber. It's connected to a really complex web of history, economics, environmental concerns, and human lives. And maybe, just maybe, by understanding these connections, we can all play a part in shaping a more sustainable and equitable future. Not just for Firestone, Liberia, but for every corner of the globe that's touched by global commerce.
It's been a fascinating deep dive, hasn't it? This is just the beginning of the conversation. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for that positive change.
Absolutely.
Who knows, your insights might spark our next deep dive.